author of the world's joy, bearer of the world's pain, at the heart of all our trouble and sorrow, let unconquerable gladness dwell. Amen. One of my favorite singers these days is Rhiannon Giddens. She is an African-American musician from North Carolina, and she studied at Oberlin Conservatory to be an opera singer. But then she got hooked on the banjo, the fiddle, and old-time music, and her career took an unexpected turn. Some of her best work, I think, is in an album called Freedom Highway. The original songs on Freedom Highway are inspired by the experience of African Americans during the time of slavery and beyond. One of the songs is based on an old American black folktale about people who could fly, actually fly through the air. But when they were put on boats and taken across the ocean, they lost their wings and forgot how to fly. During the time of bondage, an old man remembered the magic words, and those who could fly rose up out of the cotton fields and flew away to freedom. People who couldn't fly watched them go, and they told their children who told their children, and so on and so on. The story was passed on from generation to generation. In the song, a young slave girl discovers that she too is able to fly, just like her granny could. The chorus of the song says, "They could fly, they could fly. They could slip the bonds of earth and rise so high. They could fly across the ocean together, hand in hand, searching, always searching for the promised land." When I first heard Rhiannon Giddens' song, I happened to be reading a book by the Brazilian theologian Rubem Alves. The book is called Tomorrow's Child. It's a book about imagination and creativity and the creation of new forms of social organization. Alves writes about the use of magic in so-called primitive people. Why do people create magic? The answer is simple. When people feel safe and secure, there is no need for magic. But when they find themselves in a dangerous place, when they perceive that their lives are at risk, they turn to magic rituals and incantations. Anthropologists say that the practice of magic is rooted in feelings of powerlessness. Rubem Alves says that there's a kind of realism that tells us to accept our fate. It is a realism that tells you that there's nothing you can do about the circumstances of your life. Just get used to it. But magic is a way for captive and powerless people to rebel against present realities. It's an expression of hope. It is an action that is rooted in a passion for that which is missing in present circumstances. They could fly, they could fly. They could slip the bonds of earth and rise so high. They could fly across the ocean together, hand in hand, searching, always searching for the promised land. I think Rubem Alves would understand that song perfectly. We may not be able to actually fly, but perhaps we can remember the stories of ancestors who could. And we can tell those stories to our children. Telling the stories of magical flying enables people who are in bondage to keep alive their hope for freedom. Reality, as it is constructed by the powerful, says, no, you must accept your bondage. Get used to it, because you are powerless to do anything about it. But the imagination says, yes, there is another way. Freedom is possible. They could fly across the ocean together, hand in hand, searching, always searching for the promised land. In magic, says Rubem Alves, the logic of reality is abolished. It is an act of rebellion. He sees a connection between magic, dreams, and imagination. The play of children, for example, is an activity through which a world is created. Through imagination, an alternative world is constructed. Through dreams, we imagine another world. Not the world that's given to us, but the world as it could be. We see our heart. We see with our hearts, perceiving avenues of possibilities. Magic, dreams, play, imagination, along with art and religion, all are tools that personality creates to carry on its resistance. Magic, dreams, play, imagination. They can awaken us to truths about our lives and about our world that we might otherwise miss. The constraints of a so-called reality that is imposed by the powers to keep us complacent. They can blind us to what is there in front of us, or beside us, or within us. A very long time ago, a man named Jacob fell asleep beside a river. That night he had a strange dream. In the dream, he saw a great ladder reaching from earth to heaven. And he saw angels ascending and descending on that ladder. As he was gazing at the ladder and the angels, God stood beside him and spoke to him. And God's words were words of promise. I will give you. Your offspring shall be. You shall spread abroad. All the families of the earth shall be blessed in you. Know that I am with you and will keep you. I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you. These are the same promises that God had made long ago to Jacob's grandfather, Abraham. When Jacob woke up, he looked around and said, "How awesome is this place? Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." It clearly was not what Jacob was expecting. The experience must have been exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. God has that effect on people. Jacob was on the lam, running for his life. His twin brother Esau, born only a few minutes before Jacob, was entitled to the inheritance from their father Isaac. In those days, everything went to the eldest son. But Jacob was his mother Rebekah's favorite. So she had devised a trick by which Jacob could steal the inheritance. She knew that Jacob was old and that he couldn't see very well. And so Rebekah made her husband his favorite dinner. She dressed up Jacob in Esau's clothing, and she put lamb skin on his arms so that when Isaac reached out to touch his son, Jacob would feel like Esau and smell like Esau. Jacob then asked for a blessing. The deceitful scheme worked like a charm. Isaac gave the blessing, which was irrevocable, to Jacob. When Esau showed up to present his own delicious lamb stew to his father, he was informed that he was too late. The blessing and the inheritance had already been given. When Esau realized that he'd been had, he was furious. Who wouldn't be? He vowed to kill Jacob. So Rebekah warned Jacob to get out of Dodge as quick as possible and head for the hills to run for his life. And with night approaching, Jacob found himself in that deserted place, traveling alone, on the run from his justifiably angry brother, fleeing the scene of his own deceitfulness and trickery. He must have been thinking about how he had gone a little too far this time. Maybe his luck was about to run out. With only a stone for a pillow, he decided to get some sleep on the ground. To Jacob, it must have seemed an utterly God-forsaken place. And as he thought about the turmoil of his own life, the worries that he had mostly created for himself, he fell into this very deep sleep. When Jacob awakens from this strange dream, he has enough sense to recognize it as the gift that it was. He declares that the place is special. It is the gate of heaven, the place where heaven and earth are connected. Maybe it is the angels that he sees ascending and descending. Ascending and descending, which is kind of strange. Shouldn't they be descending and ascending? Coming down to visit the earth briefly and then going back up to the place where God is? But then the place where God is, surprisingly, is right there next to Jacob. God joins him in viewing this spectacle of the ladder. More importantly, God re-articulates the promises made long ago to grandfather Abraham. Jacob, as nefarious as he may be, suddenly sees himself differently. His identity is reconstructed as the recipient of the divine promise. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. Jacob now understands the purpose and meaning of his life. They were there all along, but he didn't know it, or he'd forgotten it. He and his offspring are to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. In God's perspective, the world is not a place of cold scheming and plotting for personal advantage or the advantage of one group of people. Instead, the world is a place of blessing and promise. And God is not confined to some far off heaven, far away, remote from human affairs. Instead, God is right there beside Jacob. And I think that means that God is there beside each one of us. Not because we deserve it, not because we have earned it, but because that is just how God is. I don't know if Jacob had all this figured out or if he fully understood what had been revealed to him. It was a lot to comprehend, and maybe it took some time to sink in. But in the moment of his awakening, he was clearly a little unnerved and struck with awe. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. In Hebrew, Bethel literally means God's house. How do we break free from the constructed realities that constrain us and oppress us and hold us in bondage? How do we open ourselves to dreams and imagination and playfulness and creativity? How do we learn to pick up these tools of resistance? How do we become aware of who we are and what the trajectory of our life might be? How do we come to recognize that we live in a world of blessing and that we might ourselves be a blessing to the world? How do we become dreamers of blessing? Perhaps the realization comes upon us when we least expect it. Perhaps our eyes and ears will be opened, taking us completely by surprise. Perhaps we will wake up to who we are and what we are to be about. Amen. And thanks be to God who makes it so.